Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We do a couple of webinars a month. Sometimes they are sales webinars given by our sales department, which introduce people to ClubExpress, give an idea of what ClubExpress is and how it might work for their organization. And a couple of times a month, we do deep dives into various modules or new features and things like that. And today is one of those. We're going to be talking today about a module in ClubExpress that a lot of people are not terribly familiar with. Now, ClubExpress has over 20 built-in modules, from things like the event calendar and document library and discussion forums and all sorts of built-in modules. But there are a couple that are optional, and this is one of them. This is the resource scheduler. And the resource scheduler is a very interesting module and may be a really good thing for your organization to add to your existing system. And so we'll try to give you an overview of what it does. And today it's going to be from the user perspective, how a member or even a non-member can make a reservation. And in 2 or 3 weeks, we'll have another webinar that talks about how you set this up. So this and a companion tutorial is the kind of thing that we could show to a member to show them how to do things, as opposed to showing to an administrator and showing how to get things set up. Let's take care of a little bit of housekeeping. All of the phones and microphones are currently muted, so questions should be asked into the chat window. At the end of the demonstration, we'll revisit the chat window to see if there are any questions that weren't answered during the demonstration. And this is particularly useful for people who are viewing this webinar via recording. And speaking of recordings, all of our recordings, whether it be webinars or training videos, are available from the clubexpress.com Cool Stuff page. If you go to clubexpress.com, click on the Cool Stuff link, it takes you to the Cool Stuff page. And on the lower left side, there's a tab for webinars, there's a tab for video tutorials. The webinars tab will show the upcoming webinar schedule, as well as recorded webinars. All of our recordings are actually stored on YouTube. So if you are viewing one on YouTube, click on the clubexpress.com name at the bottom of the video. You can subscribe and optionally get notified, so that way you can be notified when there is new content. And one more thing, if you are using ClubExpress, and particularly if ClubExpress is being really valuable for your organization, we'd appreciate it if you would go to clubexpress.com/reviews and click on one of these review sites, leave a review so other people who are evaluating association management solutions can have the benefit of your experience and how it's working for your organization. The resource scheduling module lets your club or association set up resources that can either be rented or reserved. The only difference that I take between rented and reserved is one you're typically charging for. And what kinds of organizations could use this? Well, if you have a tennis club, or if you have tennis courts in your organization, you might let people reserve tennis courts. Or a sailing club or yacht clubs might have boats or canoes or things like that their members can rent. Ski clubs might have a lodge acting more like a hotel, where you could reserve rooms for overnight or multi-night stays. You might have a club that has a clubhouse that has meeting or banquet rooms that your people can set up for meetings or for weddings or things like that. And clubs might have equipment that their members are allowed to check out on either a daily or an hourly basis. So this webinar, the one we're doing today, is looking at it from the user point of view, and will show how a user reserves resources. We're doing another one in a couple of weeks called Resource Scheduler Administration that will look at how to configure the system options and add resources. Let's talk a little bit about resources. Resources can be rented or reserved either by the hour, and they can be set up in 15, 30, or 60-minute increments. Or a resource might be a daily resource, like for a sailboat or a canoe, where you rent for a day. Or they may be overnight, like a ski lodge room. So there may be something where you check in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and check out 11 o'clock the next day. In this demonstration, we're going to do two things. We're going to reserve a piece of equipment for a couple of hours, and we're going to reserve a cabin for a couple of days. And there are a couple of things that you should note about resources. Each resource can have different properties and rental rules. So you could have 4 cabins, and most of the cabins go with one set of rules, but there's special rules for this other cabin. Or you might have tennis courts where you have some clay courts and you have grass courts, and certain courts have to be shut down on certain days so that the grass revive itself. So the properties can be controlled very closely by the administrators. A club can define a setup period before a reservation starts and a cleanup period after a reservation finishes, because it may take them time to prepare a room or to clean up a room. And obviously, those times can't be available to other reservations because the resource will automatically have those prep and cleanup times added to the reservation, although the person who's reserving it is not charged specifically for that unless there's some configuration that does so. And resources can have different fees at different times of the day, week, or month, or year. You can define a setup fee, and there could be different fees for members and non-members. And resources can have blocks of time where a resource is simply not available. Maybe it's because it needs maintenance after a weekend's worth of rentals, or maybe it's going to be down for repairs. Reservations operate using a shopping cart metaphor. So a reservation can include more than one resource, and they can be reserved for the same time or at different times. And the checkout process is like any other thing that you check out, like for an event. It links the shopping cart to the standard ClubExpress transaction and payment system. Now, when you're looking at today's demonstration, and in your clubs, unless you've already enabled it for your club, the resource scheduler is actually on your club tab in the control panel in test mode. So in test mode, you can do pretty much everything except create actual transactions. So resources, you can put them on the schedule, but they're not actually going to incur charges. The resource scheduling module is an optional module. There is a one-time fee to activate this module for your website, and it's $500. If you want ClubExpress to activate this for your site, contact our customer success people, and they will add it to your site. We're going to be demonstrating a few things. First thing we'll do is we're going to log in as a regular member. We're not logging in as an administrator here. We're going to take a look at what's already in the member's shopping cart, because a couple of minutes before I started this session, I put a couple of things into her cart. And we'll note that a reservation, when you're reserving things, you've got 30 minutes from the last time you stuck something into the reservation cart before it times out. So you can't just put something in a reservation cart, walk away for 3 hours and come back and say, I'm going to finish the reservation. It's like reserving an airplane seat. If you don't complete the reservation, the airplane seat doesn't just stay stuck in your shopping cart. Along those same lines, the cart is linked to your browser session. So if you log out, any uncompleted reservations are automatically canceled. So these are just things to think about. We're going to review the member's reservation history. Then we'll take a look at the resource scheduler page, see the resources that are available, look at the description for the page, the cancellation policy, look at the groups of resources and show and hide some details. And then we're actually going to make a couple of reservations. We're going to reserve 2 items. We're going to reserve a piece of equipment for a few hours, and we're going to rent a cabin for 2 days. We'll look at the reservation details, date and time selection, special instructions, and all that. We will link it to an event, which is kind of a cool thing to do. Then we will look at reservations that need approval. We'll look at user agreements, the ability for you to email others. So say if you rent a tennis court or a room, you can send emails to other people saying that you've already made this reservation. We'll show how you can add it to your calendar, and then we'll complete the reservation and talk about contacting an administrator to create a recurring reservation. Say if you need a conference room on Wednesdays and Fridays for the next 3 months. The user can't do that, but an administrator certainly can do that. So we are currently logged in as Jenny Cho, and she's a regular member. She's not an administrator. She's not a coordinator. And you will notice that next to her name, there is a little shopping cart icon. And if you hover over her name, it shows that there is currently some reservations that she has pending. These are not completed reservations. These are what's currently in her shopping cart. So if I click on this, we will see that she has reserved 2 tennis courts. It's tennis court number 3. She's reserved on Friday, April 24th for an hour. And she says that this is practice for a Saturday tournament. And that would incur a fee of $40 because it's $40 an hour. And she's also reserved that same tennis court on April 25th, the next day, for foursomes with her friends, the Smiths. And she reserved it for 2 hours there. So at this point, she can go and reserve another, or she can complete the reservation. We're going to come back to this because I want her to reserve a few more things. So now let's take a look at her reservations that she's already done. So if we come up to her name and look at her profile, and we scroll down here, we see that there is a reservation history link. So if I click on this, you will see that the 2 that she has put in, although she hasn't actually completed it, they are marked as approved because these do not need approval by the administrators. Certain other things, like a barometer logger here for one that is passed that never actually got picked up, was waiting for approval. And if any of them have been canceled, either by the administrator or the user, or maybe the session went out, they are shown that they would be canceled. So these are the 2 that she currently has in her cart, and she could remove them from her cart here, or by going to the cart and removing them here. But we'll leave them in the cart for the time being. So now let's just take a look at the resources available. Now, the resources have been placed on the members menu. These could be placed on the public menu, but at the moment, this is for the members only. So if we look at this page, this is the resource scheduler. And as I mentioned, you'll see that it is in test mode. So again, it's important to know that the behavior is going to be a little different because we're not actually collecting money, so it won't invoke a payment mechanism where the member would see that they owe money for things. On the resource scheduler screen, there's a little preamble here that the administrators have set up. So we offer several resources to guide you to become a better ballooner. This is the Northwest Balloon Club, a fictitious balloon club that we set up for many of our demonstrations and tutorials. And we have a cancellation policy button here because the administrators have set up a cancellation policy. So it says, if I click on this, it says that all resources are owned by the club and we have the right to close the facilities. And it says, if you cancel a reservation, contact Martin Smith or cancel it from your member profile. So we're giving them instructions on how to cancel. And it says, if you cancel a reservation prior to making a payment, there'll be no fee. Cancellations of reservations for which you've already paid may incur a small charge, and any credit issued will be issued to your account. So there's no easy way of refunding their money, but they do get a credit so they can apply it to other things that they reserve. And it says here that frequent cancellations may result in loss of reservation privileges. So it's just telling people whatever you want to tell them. This isn't something that ClubExpress sets up. These are your organization's policies. And you'll see that the resources are grouped into categories. So here are balloons that can be rented. So each category can have a description. We have 2 balloons available for hourly rentals. You'll be accompanied by one of our club members as a guide. We have equipment. We have some cabins at the lodge. We've got meeting rooms, and we've got tennis courts. And you saw those tennis courts reservations that Jenny had set up. And for each of these, you can see the actual resources by clicking on the view icon. So if you click on view, you'll see that there are 2 balloons that can be rented. For each of the balloons, it's got information about the balloon. If I want to hide this, I can hide this and go down, say, to the next one, which is the equipment. And there's a barometer logger that we're actually going to rent today. But there's some other things, a burner and double basket. There could be various tools that they lend out. But for any of these things, you can view all the resources. So this one has cabins. So we have this cabin called the Pine Cabin. The Oak Cabin doesn't currently have a picture, but we're going to rent one of those cabins. And of course, the tennis courts have all of these. And you'll see that one of these courts is flagged as unavailable, where some of these other ones are available. So that's pretty straightforward. You decide what you want to rent, and you can do it from here. So let's reserve some equipment. What I want to do is I want to reserve the barometer logger. So if I click on reserve, it takes me to the equipment category. And then you will see that because I was in here before looking at Saturday, April 25th, it shows April 25th. And it's highlighting the equipment category because that's what we clicked on. But at this point, we could switch to any of the other categories. And as you can see, moving back and forth through this goes on a day-by-day basis. And the reason this is grayed out here, and the reason I can't go any further into the past, is that you can't make a reservation for this because these times have already passed. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a reservation for Saturday. And it turns out that this particular item here, this two-burner thing, is just not available on Saturday morning. But let's reserve the barometer logger for 9 o'clock in the morning. So if I click on this, as I move my mouse over this, you will see that the box turns green. If there were any other reservations, you would already see them listed here. So you can't obviously reserve the equipment when somebody else is using it, but at least you could see what has already been reserved and optionally who is reserving it. So if I click on this, it brings me to the reservation entry screen, the add entry screen. So it's saying this is for the barometer logger for this date. Now, because I clicked on 9 o'clock, it assumes 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, a 1 hour reservation, because that's the way the defaults for this reservation have been set up. But I can actually change that and say, oh, I really want to do it from, say, 10 o'clock. And it is done in 1 hour increments. So let's do it for 2 hours. And let's say we want to take it from 10 o'clock to noon. Now, there's no fee being charged for this, but there is actually an approval process for this. They're just not going to hand this piece of equipment out until they know that someone actually has a balloon and they're actually going to use it. So what we're going to say the usage description is test against my equipment. And do I want to associate this with an event? And I'm saying, yeah, I want to associate this with an event. And there was an event called instrument training that was already on the calendar. And so if I choose next, it says, okay, this particular piece of equipment requires a user agreement. And so in this case, the user agreement says this barometer is powered by a couple of AAA batteries. The batteries are not included, so bring 3 fresh batteries with you. And then the user agrees to bring the batteries and confirm that the device is functioning properly. We agree the unit must be returned without batteries, and if the unit is lost or damaged, the user agrees to pay for repair or replacement. You can't proceed until you check I agree. So if I choose I agree, we can either save and check out, or I can save and add another. So we're going to save and add another. So now you will see that this has been placed on the calendar, although the reservation isn't completed. In effect, it's like having a seat reserved on an airplane. Yeah, it's considered reserved. And because the way this has been set up, it says that the cell says who has reserved it and what it's being used for. It could be set up that it simply says reserved. It could just have the username. But in this case, we like to show the username and the usage information. Sometimes it's required and sometimes it's optional, again, depending on how it's been set up. And more info is going to link to the event. So we can see we had linked to that event. So this will bring us to the event. So now we want to add another item. Now, if we look up here, you'll see the white spaces are available. The gray stripes here are unavailable. And if something had a setup or a cleanup period, they also get marked with another kind of gray crosshatched area. Let's just take a look at the tennis courts. So you'll see that Jenny had reserved this one for 3 to 5 p.m. on Saturday. And if I go back a day, she reserved it for 2 p.m. on Friday, so she could practice for this hot match they have with the Smiths. But now what I want to do is look at cabins at the lodge. Now, when you go to a daily resource, now you don't have times for the reservations. You've got days for the reservation. And in this case, what we want to do is Jenny is actually coming in from out of town for this instrument training. And while she's there, she's going to do some time at the tennis court. So what she's going to do is that she wants to reserve the Pine Cabin, arriving on Friday and actually leaving on Sunday. So she's going to come in, she's going to click here, and this is a little different here. It says, I need this arriving Friday, and the check-in time has already been predefined at 3 p.m., and we want to have it for 2 nights, which means she's going to be checking out on Sunday at 11 a.m., much like a hotel room. Now, if this did not allow for overnight stays, if it was like a canoe rental or a balloon rental, you wouldn't have the number of nights available. It would just simply be for that same day. And so here it's showing that because we had put in for 2 nights and it's $150 a night, it has already automatically calculated the $300 fee. And so we're going to say instrument training event and tennis tournament. And we say special instructions, no feather pillows. Allergic. So maybe that's something that they need to know. And is this associated with the event? Yeah, we can put that in because that's also got to do with this. And I'm going to say next. Now, like the other one, there's a user agreement here. This is lodge cabins are limited to current members and pets are not permitted. There are no late checkouts, etc. I agree to this. And now it's time to check out. Now, before I go check out, Samantha, do we have any questions hanging out in the chat?
Just a couple of questions of people asking about it being used on things specifically. So we have a club that rents equipment on a monthly basis. Could that be something that this module could accommodate it? Setting a daily rate would be complicated because it would be different every month.
I don't know because, I mean, you could have a defined number of days. We can take a look at that. The question is, are you renting it from the first of the month to the end of the month, or are you renting it from a month from the time that you pick it up versus it's kind of like, does everybody renew on the same date or are they rolling renewals? That's a good question. We could take a look at that if we have some time towards the end as to, could you say that the default number of days is 30 days, for example? And is it from the 15th of this month to the 15th of the next month, but this month has 28 days as opposed to 30 or 31 days and leap years? You can appreciate where it gets a little confusing saying what a month is. But we could probably figure out some way of doing this. All right, so I'm going to go and check out. So this brings her to the cart, and you saw 2 tennis courts were already there. There's a barometer that she's reserved for 2 hours, and she's reserved the Pine cabin for a couple of nights. So at this point, there's a couple of things she can do. One is, I want to notify others about my reservation. So if I click on this, we can send to all of these people, we can say instrument, training, and tennis. And we can say something like, we will all be staying in the Pine cabin, 2 bedrooms. And then what you would do is you would add the members to the list. So I'm just going to give one here to, let's do the Smiths. And we're going to send it to Mary Smith. And if I save the notification, you can actually have 5 different members that you could add. And when you save the notifications, this gets part of the reservation. At this point, we can complete the reservation. But if I wanted to add to calendar, I could click on any one of these. It will download, I guess, an ICS file, which could then be clicked on and added to your Google Calendar or your Outlook or any of those things. So if I complete the reservation, it says your reservation request has been saved. You will be notified when it is approved. Well, when what is approved? Well, let's go take a look at a reservation. So we go back up to Jenny Cho's profile here. And if we go to the reservation history, you will see that the 2 tennis courts, they're already approved. The cabin is approved, but the barometer is waiting for approval. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to another browser here, and I'm going to log in as an administrator. And if I go to the control panel and I go to the club tab, you see the resource schedulers here. This is where an administrator would look at all of the resources, the balloons, the cabins, the equipment, and things like that. And this is where you configure all of these things. This is where you configure things like the user agreement for the barometer logger. And you could have user agreements for a whole category of equipment, but you can actually override all this stuff. The administrator can make special times and use the category settings or set custom times. There's tremendous amount of flexibility in this. But if I go back to the resource manager actually has 2 screens. There's the resource manager, which lets you manage all of the resources. And then there's the reservation manager, which we click on here, that lets you manage the reservations. So if I search here, we can look at all the reservations as of a particular date. So I'm using today's date, and we can decide whether we want to look at the members or non-members and what's just in the cart, what's already waiting for approval. So we're looking for payment pending and waiting for approval or final. So if I come over here, I can come over here to this screen that says Approve Reservations, which would show all of the things that are waiting for approval. Or I can come back a page and click on the cart for a particular reservation. And if I click on the cart, here's where anything that needs approval, I could approve it, I could cancel that item, or I could reject it. Whereas on that approval screen I showed just a moment ago, that's only for approvals. But if there's someone that you need to reject on an item, you can reject it. And if you choose reject, it's going to ask you, why do you want to reject it? And it might be because you already have one item out and you can only have one at a time, or some reason that you're just not going to let this person have this piece of equipment, or that they've rented it 6 times in the past and you just don't want them to do it again. But in this case, I'm going to approve it. So when I approve it and I save, now when I come over to Jenny, right now we're waiting for approval. I just refresh the page. Now it shows that it was approved. That's a really handy thing to be able to know, that you can set up something that doesn't automatically get approved, that really needs to go through some sort of the vetting process where an administrator or a coordinator has to take a look at the item and decide whether or not it's going to be approved. The other thing is that if someone needs to have a recurring meeting set up, if I want to add a reservation, now I'm logged back in as Martin Smith. If I add a reservation, I could say, okay, what kind of reservation is this? Well, let's make this a meeting room. And what I want to do, let's do a meeting room here that we want to have a meeting every Saturday to noon. And there's a setup fee for this, so I'm going to make it a $10 setup fee. And need sugar-free drinks. And I'm not going to associate with an event, but because I'm an administrator, I'm going to say copy this reservation. And if I go to the next, now it says, it gives me the copy feature. So I say copy. I can say I want to make multiple copies every week on a Saturday for the next 6 weeks. And if I choose next, it shows that it is putting all of these in here. And when I say save and check out, because I'm an administrator, it's got to know, well, who am I going to be making this for? And so if I come over here and I say check out, it says, okay, am I making the reservation for myself? Am I making it for another member? If I say another member, we'll make this for Manny Diaz. And I can complete the reservation. So now this has been made every Saturday for the next 6 weeks. So the reason I'm showing you this from a user standpoint is that if you need to make a reservation, you got to know that it is possible for you to reserve things on a recurring basis, but you can't do this, but you can contact your administrator or your coordinator, and they will be able to do that for you. That's pretty much everything that I wanted to demonstrate. Samantha, do we have any questions? And
Yes.
are there any more questions? Are we looking at the question from a user standpoint or from an administrator standpoint?
From administrator standpoint.
Okay.
So one of the questions was regarding the ability to make reservations on behalf of members. We have one person who wants to be able to control signing people up and obviously limit the number of people that sign up for a period of time. So in this particular example, it was a public pool. When there's open swim, limiting the number of members that can actually sign up for a time slot. So the question was, do you have the ability to, once you make a reservation on behalf of member number one, can you go in and continue to make a number of reservations as an administrator until you have reached 10 people at that time?
No, because what happens is you have reserved the time slot. That's like reserving a tennis court and saying, was this going to be singles or doubles, or am I practicing alone? Here, no, you've just reserved the resource. We're treating this like a hotel room and not like a youth hostel where you've got X number of beds and we're going to fill the beds. Somebody's rented the room, and now when the beds are filled, we can't do any more. In that case, I would probably set it up more like an event to say that we have this event for this, instead of the resource, this event is from, the pool is open from this time to this time, and we're allowing X number of people to register for it. Yeah, I don't see where this mechanism would do that, because it's not trying to keep track of the people that are using it other than the person who made the reservation. Mm-hmm. So you can probably get around it with, it's kind of funny. Thinking about the different mechanisms, the event mechanism might work. Of all things, you could actually rebrand the volunteering module, where you say, okay, we've got something that's happening at a particular time. We need 6 people to volunteer for something.
Okay.
So we could say, okay, we've got this pool thing being open at time. Do you want to use the pool? Volunteer for pool duty or for pool participation.
Or register for an event and limit the capacity for the event and tie the event to creating the reservation time.
Yeah, and you could even tie the event to the volunteer module. So the volunteer module could be called our swim time thing. So you're setting up all of these opportunities and then time slots within the opportunity. So I'm just trying to figure out, since the resource scheduling isn't really set up to do that kind of thing, could it be done with some other modules? Perhaps.
I think so.
Yeah.
Another question that we had, which would be how a non-member makes a reservation, which would be pretty much the same as a member making the reservation, except they're entering in a little bit different information. And then you just have to make sure that the resource scheduler is on your non-member or your public menu.
Yeah, let's take a quick look at that. So what I'm going to do, I'm logged in as the administrator. So I'm going to go to the menus. I'm going to look at the public menu. I'm going to edit the public menu. And I'm going to add the resource scheduler to the public menu and save. And now I'm going to jump back over to the other one where Jenny was. I'm going to log out. So now I'm logged out, and you can see resource scheduler has been added to this menu. So now if I click on resource scheduler, only a subset of the things that are available to members are available to non-members, because that's the way it's been set up. Each of these categories, you can tell that, okay, we don't want to lend equipment out to the non-members, but we do want to let them use meeting rooms. So at this case, what would happen is if I click on reserve, it says, okay, which meeting room? You see how these meeting rooms are set up only for members? Well, I can grab this meeting room. It'll ask me the same kind of information. Usage description, call it lecture. Are there special instructions? Need projector. And if I say save and check out, and I check out here, and you, by the way, you can enter a title for the reservation just so that you recognize one reservation from other reservations. When you check out, now it's going to ask you, who are you? If you've previously made a reservation or you're already on the mailing list, what you want to do is you want to search. So if you put in your email and your first name, and that way it wouldn't create a new non-member record in the database. But it's going to ask you the information here, and when you fill out all the information, then it would complete the reservation. So it's a really good question. This is the way it's done. For those items, let's sort of go reserve another. So you can't do it. Can't do it from this page. If I just go back, it shows you that only those categories that are available to non-members will be shown, and within the categories, only those resources. In this case, just these 2 rooms. The rest of them are only members. So that was a good question, and we can see that this is reserved, but it doesn't say for who yet because we didn't actually complete it. Good question. Samantha?
Last question that just came in. Is there a wait list for a time that's already reserved?
I do not believe we have a wait list.
We do not.
You would actually, if the reservation shows who it is, you might be able to contact that person. As a non-member, we can't see the tennis courts that have already been reserved. No, at the moment, there is no wait list function for this. So this is a module that we encourage you to check out. It's on all of your control panels as administrators. Now, let me just go back to Martin. You would go into the control panel and go into the club tab, resource scheduler. You would come over here and decide who this would be visible to, either any website visitor or members only, and you could decide whether or not it is active, even though it's in test mode, active, because if I turn it off and I save it, then you say that it's not active. So when you first start up, it's probably not active. You just come over here and say, oh, I want to make it active. And this decides who you can make it available to. So we say that it is active here. But again, it's still in test mode until you contact ClubExpress and say, I want to add it to my site, and in which case a one-time charge gets made to your club, and then it becomes active. So any other last-minute questions?
That is it.
In that case, thank you, everyone, for attending. And take a look at this thing, play with it, see if it's something that would be useful for your organization, and see if there are things that you either want to keep track of, people's use of, equipment, tennis courts, rooms, library materials, and things like that. Things that you want people to come in and check out. There's a lot of functionality here. The next one is going to be about administering, setting up the resources, configuring reservations, configuring categories, and all that. There's a lot to cover there. We've just scratched the surface. But this is the kind of thing you can hand to once you have implemented the resource scheduler, or you can send this webinar to people in your organization that might want to decide whether or not you want to use it. So thank you, everyone, for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, and stay safe.